Good evening, fellow followers of the stars. This is Rick Levine with your mid-month March update. That's March of 2022. And I am recording this on Wednesday evening, March 16th. And I hope to have it out to you sometime by Thursday prior to the full moon on Thursday night or Friday morning, depending upon where you are on the planet. So, before I get started, I have a couple of short announcements. I'll try to make it as brief as possible. Number one, as I said last month at the March forecast, this mid-month update, which normally goes out to the $3 a month Patreon subscribers, is going out as a public video because my forecast was done while I was still on the road. It was a bit shorter than usual, and I thought I would just do this mid-month update as a public publicly distributed video. If you're interested in getting the mid-month updates all the time, occasionally I do distribute them publicly. $3 a month contribution through Patreon. That's patreon.com/Rick Levine. The link's right there. And sign up for whatever level you choose. Everything helps. I appreciate it very much. And while I am in the process of letting you know about my stuff, also don't forget to sign up at Instagram, and that would be Rick Levine Astrologer, for my daily astrological reflection. It's less a horoscope than it is really just a reflection on what's going on, this day, these days, these times. And that's every day on Instagram and also on Facebook, facebook.com/Rick Levine Astrologer, Instagram, Rick Levine Astrologer. Okay, that's that. A couple of other very quick things. First of all, a number of years ago, I'm thinking about 30 years ago, I was on the board of directors for AFAN, which is the Association for Astrological Networking, and we decreed that we would establish the Spring Equinox, the vernal equinox, every year as International Astrology Day. And it's grown and continues to grow. There are all kinds of events this weekend for International Astrology Day. In fact, AFAN is actually doing a free networking event. You go to afan.org. ISAR, which is the International Society for Astrological Research, is doing a weekend symposium. That's a 2-day symposium. It's $75 for ISAR members, and if you're a non-member, it's $120, but you get a 1-year ISAR membership in that. It's a wonderful organization. There'll be 20 astrologers from around the world, and most of the astrologers will be doing 20-minute talks on a variety of opinions of what's going on now. Geopolitically, politically, technologically, economically. There'll be speakers from all over the world. I will be sharing a keynote address with Chris Brennan, and we'll be talking about the future of astrology. Can astrology actually predict its own future? Information for this can be found at isarastrology.org, and the symposium theme is A New World Awakening. And my lecture is on Saturday afternoon, and that would be 5 o'clock Eastern Time, 2 o'clock Pacific Time, I think. The entire schedule is there. It's going to be a pretty cool event. Lots of interesting speakers. Other thing I want to mention briefly, I'm trying to make these as brief as possible, is that OPA, the Organization for Professional Astrology, is holding a very cool, almost like a new breakthrough kind of event that they've been developing for years. And this is kind of like takes it to another level. The event is called iAstrologer, and it's basically an event that's both online and in person, and you can do parts of it so you don't have to come to the in-person event. The actual real world event will be in Tucson, Arizona on April 29th through May 1st. That's part one. Part two will be May 2nd through the 4th. It's almost like ordering off of an a la carte menu. It's a comprehensive program, not on astrology technique, but how to build a better astrology business. There'll be sessions on branding and marketing and software tutorials and addressing arguments against astrology and public speaking guidance and a writing workshop and a whole host of other things, mentorships and so on. It's a very in-depth program. I'm doing 2 events that are on the online portion that will be just via Zoom, and I'll be doing a lecture at the event in Tucson also. And go to OPA Astrology, all one word, OPA, Organization for Professional Astrology, opaastrology.org. Click on I Astrologer. Realize your dream to become a successful astrology, and I'll see some of you there. Last thing, very briefly, probably the largest conference of the year, or for several years, back to ISAR, the International Society for Astrological Research. This will be on August 25th through the 29th. At the Westin Hotel in Westminster, Colorado. That's kind of between Boulder and Denver. It's a beautiful facility. I've been there. There'll be over 100 speakers from all around the world. Remember, ISAR has chapters or organizations. I think now they're in 49 countries and growing. So it'll be quite an event. And there'll be 6 pre- and post-conference workshops. I'll be doing one of those. And there'll be workshops and additional events on training for consulting skills and ethics training. And there'll be a trade store and a bookstore and social events. And again, go to ISAR. You can go to ISAR 2022 or isar.org. It'll be a tremendous event, and I'm very excited about that. It'll be nice to be back in the world and actually seeing people in person. Okay, now into the material. I know some of you get impatient with me doing that, but this is my way of networking, and some of you are not interested in this kind of stuff, and others of you are absolutely eager to connect to the astrology community in any ways that you can. So, it's been a pretty crazy month already, has it not? And I guess the craziness of March really began back in February. And I remember saying in February's forecast that February would come to a culmination at the new moon on March 2nd, which really isn't in February, but everything in February was building to that new moon. And obviously that new moon, from a level of difficulty, challenge, and intensity, did not let us down. Hopefully we'll be able to find a way out of this mess that we as humans have created. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here on the geopolitical aspects of that, other than, war is just a total waste of energy. It's I don't even want to get started on it. I just want to say that as much as my heart goes out to those people who are suffering, and those people who have been relocated and are going to other countries because their country now is under siege. As much as my heart goes out to them, I think it's important that we don't forget that there are many other places where there are also, and have been recently, total disasters. And sometimes our media picks and chooses which ones we're supposed to be, we're supposed to have more empathy for. Just remember, we, the United States as a country, bombed the crap out of Iraq for years for no apparent reason. And that there have been people suffering and still are in Syria, in Yemen, Afghanistan, all around the world. So while we hold the people in Ukraine, the Ukraine, close to our hearts, let us not forget those other people who are also suffering from political greed and whatever we want to call it. Okay, enough of a diatribe there. It's important, though, because this event is very much of a seminal event. It's a turning point kind of event, and I had a conversation earlier with someone who was bemoaning the fact that they couldn't predict by looking at a chart what's going to happen, and it's welcome to the real world of astrology. The world is more complicated than looking at a chart and finding an answer by just following a set of rules. I know that some astrologers would disagree with me, and I know that many students are upset by the fact that astrology isn't as mechanical and as rule-driven sometimes as we would like. The fact of the matter is we certainly can see this conflict building, or having built to this. Hopefully we've reached the crescendo, but even that, we don't know. I think it's important, though, to understand that because the long-term cycles of planets don't happen on the day, the week, even the month, and sometimes even the year, it takes time for events to ripple and build and kind of resonate and kind of get enough feedback and build and self-amplify until something happens. Now, something like the bombing of the World Trade Tower, that was pretty close to the Saturn-Uranus opposition in the fall of 2001. I mean, other events, certainly the beginning of World War I was within a few days of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in, I think it was August of 1914, I think. But this event that is unfolding in Western Europe, because it's it's Eastern Europe really, because it's in Europe, it feels much closer to home than some things that feel a little bit more isolated because they're on other continents or in other places. But it's important to understand that this particular event is not separate from the Saturn-Pluto conjunction, even though that was now pushing a little bit over 2 years ago. That the way these energies build this is part of that particular cycle. And I've talked about this in other places. I don't want to go into it too much more now. I just want to say that from my perception, 2022 was proof that we're not done with the Saturn square Uranus, which was exact 3 times in 2021, but the Saturn square Uranus was really the tail end of the Uranus square Pluto from 2012 to 2015. It was exact, but Saturn swept through there early as 2008, the beginning of the housing crisis, and that was before the Saturn-Pluto square was exact, 2012 to 2015. And now that we're on the other side of it, Saturn is now squaring Uranus, and even though it won't be exact, it comes back to within a half a degree by this autumn, by this fall in the Northern Hemisphere, by September, October, November. And so this year is still dealing with a lot of those issues and trying to get through them. Will we get through them? It's a test to see how sane we as a species are. And we'll just leave it at that for right now. For those of you who are Patreons, we're going to be doing a special event for the planetary tier and higher, where we're going to be looking at some of these charts. We're going to have a little bit of a Spring Equinox a party, and we'll be looking at some charts online, of course. So, we opened this month with like a major event. And this event is still unfolding. It's a fortnight or half of a moon cycle later. We're coming into the full moon. We're going to look at the chart of the full moon, and then we're going to follow it through to the new moon at the end of the month. And it's important again to understand that these lunar cycles are important, but they're also part of a much larger cycle. So without any further ado, let's bring up a chart and let's see where we go. We are looking at a chart for noon, March 16th. That would be Wednesday, March 16th, 2022. And all charts that I'll be showing will be Aries rising. They'll all be noon charts unless I note otherwise for the new moons and full moons. We often put in the exact time. And so you need to adjust for your time zone accordingly. These planets will be accurate wherever you are on the planet as long as you correct for the time zone. But we do not use an ascendant or midheaven because we're all over the planet, and the ascendant and midheaven assume a horizon, and our horizons are all different as we stand on the planet in different places. So we're looking at a chart for the 16th, and again, as we look at this chart, the energy has changed up there. We're coming off of a couple of years of incredibly intense Capricorn energy. We then had the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction at 0 degrees of Aquarius around Christmas time of 2020. And then Jupiter and Saturn both moved into Aquarius. Jupiter moved back into Capricorn. But all the faster moving inner planets were still cycling through Capricorn up until last month. And in fact, last month or earlier this month around the new moon, we had Mars and Venus aligning with Pluto. And in a way, this was almost like Pluto's last stand. Pluto doesn't move into Aquarius until next year, 2023. And then it toys moving back and forth through retrograde motion. But with these planets now, with Mars, Venus and Mars and Saturn on into Aquarius, and in fact Jupiter on into Pisces, we're moving into totally new territory now. We are leaving whatever that was back in 2020, 2021. We're leaving it behind, but it's not like it's just going to go away. It just becomes further distant in our rear view mirror. And those events were so strong and so powerful that they're going to be impacting us, and they're going to be with us for a long time to come. As we look at this chart, though, for Wednesday the 16th, we can see that Venus and Mars are now past their exact conjunction. They had two conjunctions because of this weird thing, because Venus was coming out of her retrograde, and therefore Mars was moving faster. Mars caught up, there was a conjunction, then Venus caught back up. But now Venus is actually outrunning Mars. Venus and Mars are both heading toward conjunctions with Saturn. Both of those will be important things to note, and we will get to them as we unfold the month. Let's see if I have this right here. Yeah, Venus conjoined Saturn on the 28th, and then Mars doesn't conjoin Saturn until April. But both of those energies are going to be energies where we're going to be up against a wall of some sort. There could be finality, whether it's finality on a war or finality on some legal situation or finality on a personal relationship. There's a sense when Venus connects up with Saturn and then Mars, there's both a sense of finality but also a sense of frustration because we want to be moving farther, we want to be moving faster, but we're feeling held back a little bit. And I think that feeling is with us all through the second half of March, because we have this, even though Venus and Mars are not within range of being conjoined to Saturn, there's that energy that's implied that the entire month they're getting closer and closer to Saturn. They have to meet up with Saturn, and Saturn is going to be the authority. Saturn is going to be the reality maker in that particular set of planetary interactions. The other thing, though, that's occurring is that we look at the pileup of planets in Pisces, and we have Mercury and Jupiter and Neptune and the Sun, and we have Venus and Mars that will eventually catch up with all of those planets, even as they start dribbling on into Aries. But we're in this watery world of Pisces where boundaries are hard to make, keep, and understand. That this is one of the basic blessings and curses of Pisces, is that the same water runs through all of us. In other words, I always think of it as the Paul McCartney lyrics, I am you as you are me as we are all together, goo goo gajoob, you know, it's that sense of it's hard to know where I begin and you end, or vice versa. We used to think that our skin was where we ended. That was it. But we know our energy now goes out further than that. And when we look at issues that are going on the planet right now, issues that have to do with boundaries, whether it's China and Taiwan and Hong Kong, or whether it's India and Pakistan over Kashmir, or whether it's Russia and the Ukraine and the whole division of Europe and Russia. I mean, all of these are boundary issues, and they're all about fear of a loss of boundary. And I should say, while we're on the subject, that the COVID pandemic is basically a symbol of this deeper pandemic of fear of loss of boundaries. And that's part of what's going on through March and even into April, because Jupiter, which moves rather slowly, being now in mid-Pisces, Jupiter catches up to Neptune in mid-April, and then Jupiter actually makes it all the way on through to Aries, getting a little bit ahead of ourselves. But the point here is that when there's so many planets in Pisces, Pisces is like perhaps the most spiritual sign, maybe not even perhaps. There's a level of high imagination, spirituality. It's the magic of how things, after they've broken down in the compost pile, how they all eventually go out to the sea and become part of the cosmic everything. In other words, we as crystals of light. So we appear to be solid, we appear to be separate, but we're just light tied up in knots, in nodes. Knots and nodes are the same words. But what happens is that like we precipitate out of the mists of the soup of Piscean seas of everything, and we become this being, the self-aware, moving, animated, self-animated, complex organic crystal, and eventually we then leave this meat body and we drift back off into that magical realm of Pisces from which everything comes and to which everything returns. And so we have these planets piled up now, and piling up even more in Pisces, and it can be difficult for us humans with boundaries and boundary issues, but it goes beyond that because we have nations and cities and governments and laws that are all about creating boundaries and rules. And with so much stuff going on in Pisces, a lot of that stuff, it's not breaking down like Pluto was breaking it down while it was in Capricorn. Well, it still is, and they are still breaking down. But this is a little different because this actually has to do with the confusion that occurs when we try to create a boundary where sometimes that boundary isn't as firm as we would either think it should be, or even our immune systems. We would think that our immune system should be able to tell what's good and what's bad and overcome that which is, not good for us, but it gets confused too, or it gets overwhelmed. So this is part of what we have going on in the middle of the month. And it kind of stays the issue throughout the month. Let's move through this a day at a time. We'll do this rather quickly. but that way we'll kind of get a sense as to what's going on. We are approaching a full moon, and again, if you look at a new moon and things that were seeded, things that began, energy that came into being, oftentimes at the full moon, there's kind of a sense of culmination or fruition, and it's like now we have to deal with what happened then. And so I think we'll have some of that. Maybe we already have begun to see some of that. But the moon itself actually moved into Virgo on Tuesday, late in the evening. And it's in Virgo all day today, March 16th. And I'm going to move this ahead now to the 17th. And for those of you who have been to other of my YouTubes, you know that when I do this, when I say the word today, I mean the day that the chart is that we're looking at. So now today is March 17th because that's the date on the chart. This chart is for noon of March 17th on Thursday. And things get a little bit busier today because we have Mercury forming a sextile with Uranus, and this is setting up the full moon that occurs either late tonight or early tomorrow morning, depending upon where you are on the planet. The Sun is making a half square to Uranus, so Uranus is heightened because both the Sun and Mercury, they're a good 15 degrees apart. But Mercury is making the sextile, and the Sun is making a 45 degree a semi square, half square, and so the energy is buzzed. It's tight. It's tense. It's electric. And one could say it's been that way, all the way since the new moon back on March 2nd. But now we're coming into another layer of it. And on March 17th at 4:02 in the afternoon, today at 4:02 in the afternoon, Pacific time, you need to adjust your time zone, the moon in Virgo is opposite Neptune at 4:02 p.m. And then 6:46 p.m., Mercury forms a half square with Pluto. So we have this Uranus and Pluto being pulled in by a number of different aspects here. And then as the evening continues, Thursday evening, the moon makes a square and a half with Venus and a square and a half with Uranus. Again, we have a lot of unknown here, a lot of potential for breakthrough, a lot of sudden energy, a lot of unexpected. And then at 12:17 a.m. on March 18th, and that's here in Seattle. Now, again, if you live east of here in Hawaii, this actually will be on the 17th late at night. So it just depends on where you live. But we have a full moon in Virgo that was opposite just a few hours ago. And over the last couple of days, it was opposite Mercury and Jupiter and Neptune and the Sun. And this poor Virgo moon is doing its share of work. Why? Because it's alone on one side of the chart. It's basically the entire chart is held within a less than a trine between the North Node and Pluto. And in fact, if we just look at the real planets, this is a really tight bundle. But the moon is like the handle of this bucket. And the moon has to balance out all that other energy. And this poor moon has to kind of make sense, analytical, practical sense out of Mercury in Pisces. Mercury doesn't want anything logical in Pisces. Mercury's, off dreaming. Mercury's off in fantasy land. Jupiter is having visions of what could be, both ecstatic heavenly visions and terror hell visions. Jupiter in Pisces is just making the current energy more. Remember, we sometimes mistake that, we sometimes trick ourselves into believing that Jupiter is good. It often is, because it brings more of something, and bounty and plentifulness is typically good. But too much of anything is not good. And so we have Jupiter in Pisces that may at this point in time, even though Jupiter is in its domicile in traditional astrology, Jupiter was the planet at home in Pisces. In modern astrology, we add Neptune to that mix. This is making this Piscean soup, this stew of both, fear of being at one with everyone, and and also the compassion that we feel when we see others who are experiencing more difficulty than we are, and we can't separate ourselves from that. But the moon is having to balance off that Jupiter, the Neptune, which basically says there are no boundaries. Neptune is boundless. Neptune is, if you can dream it, if you can imagine it, it's real. There is no Saturn to make that Neptune have boundary, at least archetypally here. And then we have, of course, the sun. And so when the full moon opposite this sun, this is difficult because that moon wants precision. That moon wants realistic, sensible solution. It wants rationality. And yet the bulk of the planets here are not being rational. They're being emotional and off in the ethers. And it's important, though, that we use this full moon to help ground the energy, and we can see that this full moon is very closely trine Pluto. And this Pluto is a take no prisoners planet, but Pluto does the job. It's almost like whatever has to happen now is happening, and then we're going to need to deal with it. That Pluto trine Pluto is actually taking a lot of the pressure off this opposition. Pluto is at the point of Thales, that point that is sextile one side of an opposition, that's to the sun, and trine the other side, that's the trine to the moon. But, so we have this Pluto that I think right now is being helpful, even though it may not feel good. And then on the other side, we have Uranus, which is not as pretty aspected. In other words, Uranus is a half of a square to the sun and a square and a half to the moon. And Uranus is that upset, revolution, shock, awe, surprise. And Uranus right now is a real bugger. And in fact, we have both Venus and Mars moving towards square to Uranus. And I think this will keep that energy up for a few days of really not knowing quite where we're going with all of this, or where this is going with or without us, that is. All right, let's go back to noon. I think it's important, though, to just not drop this idea that the moon, at the full moon, the moon was trine Pluto, but later in the day, the sun sextiles Pluto. So it's like something's going on. There's rumblings going on from deep that in some way can help resolve this energy. May not fix it as quickly as we would like, but it's certainly there. And then as we move to the Saturday the 19th, we see that Venus is now squaring Uranus. Venus at 12 Aquarius, Uranus at 12 Taurus. This can be exciting, but it's also a bit disorienting because Venus-Uranus is we're attracted to the moment. We're attracted to things that are new and different. And it's a square, so it doesn't always work out. Sometimes it's okay to be attracted to something and not move any closer to it, just to acknowledge the attraction. And I don't only mean in a relationship. I mean to an idea, to moving, to changing jobs, to whatever. But that Venus square to Uranus is an attraction to something new and different, something we haven't tried before. And that square is really also part of the fact that Mars, coming in behind Venus, Mars will actually square Uranus on the 22nd, on Tuesday. Right now we're still on Saturday, but this whole period of time has Venus and Mars squaring Uranus, and I think it's really hard to settle down. It might be hard to sleep. It certainly is, depending upon where you are in the world. But the anxiety levels are high. it's an energy that can feel good, but at this point in time, just based upon the environment where this is settling into or not settling into, I can't see this feeling real good. It's high anxiety. Then as we move to Sunday the 20th, we have, this is actually the spring equinox in the northern hemisphere. It's the autumnal equinox in the southern hemisphere, first day of fall. If you live in South Africa or New Zealand or Australia, and it's the first day of spring here in the northern climes. So the actual moment that the sun moves into Aries is at 8:33 a.m. Now, this is an important moment because the moment of equal day and equal night, equinox, equal night, the moment of that can be astronomically determined. And we, as modern tropical astrologers, we actually use a zodiac that is based upon the beginning, the 0 point, is when the sun moves into Aries. That's defined as the spring equinox. That is the beginning of our entire zodiac. And of course, that slips away from the stars at the rate of 1 degree every 72 years. And this is the big discussion that is had often in astrological circles, that the Indian, the Vedic, the Hindu astrologers, those who practice Jyotish, versus those most American and European Western world astrologers practice tropical astrology. One of those astrologies is nailed to the stars. That would be the Hindu version. And the more modern Western astrology is actually nailed to the vernal equinox. So we often look at a chart for the vernal equinox. I'm not going to back this up. It would just be a couple of hours. But it's something that you can do for where you live. Run the actual chart for the moment that the sun is at 0 degrees, 00 minutes of Aries. But we do see something interesting here. And that is that the moon has just moved into Scorpio. The moon moves into Scorpio at 8:33 a.m. This is Sunday morning. 8:33 a.m. Let me do this again. The equinox is at 8:33 a.m. The sun moves into Aries at 8:33 a.m., followed by the moon moving into Scorpio 11 minutes later at 8:44 a.m. Now, this is interesting because Mars is the ruling planet of Aries, and Mars is the traditional ruling planet of Scorpio. And so we have this Mars issue obviously kicking, and that Mars is coming into square with Uranus, which is like, again, it's like a tinderbox. It's like an electrical firestorm. And so I don't think we're done with whatever it is. I mean, whether there's talk of reconciliation or ceasefire, whatever it is that that will happen, I think is more complicated than that. But like I said, I am not willing to go out on a limb and tell you what I think is going to happen because I don't have a clue. All right, I have some clues, but I'm not going to venture a guess. All right, so also on March 20th, we have Mercury lining up with Jupiter. And remember, Mercury is moving through Pisces now, so Mercury will connect up with Jupiter and Neptune. It connects up with Jupiter today on March 20th, then with Neptune in a few days, and then it'll move into Aries and it will connect up with the Sun in Aries. And in fact, there's an interesting dance that it will do when the Sun and Mercury together will both connect up with Chiron, and that's at the end of the month. We'll get there in a few minutes. All right, we move ahead another day to the 21st. And we can see that the sun is in Aries, and it'll be in Aries for 30 days. On the 21st, on Monday, the moon here does show that as it's moving through Scorpio, it is making squares to the planets in Aquarius and opposing Uranus. And that's early in the morning on Monday. But what that means, or that suggests, is that the energy will be a bit challenging on Monday, at least early in the day. And then later in the day, the energy kind of smooths out because Mars makes a sextile with Chiron. Mars at 11 degrees of Aquarius makes a sextile with Chiron, giving us the ability to heal, giving us the ability to forgive, giving us the ability to learn and even to teach. But then the rest of the day, the moon then is actually making trines with these planets in Pisces. The moon trines Jupiter, and then it'll trine Mercury, and then late tonight, early tomorrow morning, it'll trine Neptune. Then the moon will move out of Scorpio and into Sagittarius, and this is by tomorrow. And the moon, when it moves into Sagittarius, will then form a trine with the sun. Let's move this ahead so we can see that on the 22nd. There's the moon having just moved into Sagittarius, but it's already made trines with all these planets. This means that the week starts off rather tough, or maybe the weekend ends up rather tough. But by Monday, midday, the energy becomes a little bit more mobile, a little bit more fluid. And I think on Tuesday, we actually can get some hope for some breakthrough, and it's a big but. Not that kind of big butt. It's a big butt, B-U-T, not B-U-T-T. And that big, however, or but, I worked myself into that one, didn't I? Is the fact that Mars at 12 degrees of Aquarius is now squaring Uranus at 12 degrees of Taurus. And again, this is about something sudden, it could be explosive, it could be, and I say explosive, it doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be physically like dynamite or bomb explosive, although in this environment it certainly could be that. It's just ideas. Something can happen. There's an expression of stuff that just is like too much too fast. It could be very exciting, and it could be a breakthrough, and it could also be a breakdown. So we'll just see how that unfolds. But that's March 22nd. Of course, the moon in Sagittarius is making a trine with the sun, so we might suggest that that could ameliorate that difficult energy just enough to make it so that we can deal with it. Then on Wednesday, Mercury catches up with Neptune. Mercury's moving pretty quickly. It lined up with Jupiter, now Neptune. As Mercury goes across Jupiter and Neptune, we're getting a little foreshadowing of what will happen mid-April when Jupiter and Neptune align. This is a whole deeper dive. We'll talk a lot about this in the April forecast because this is a rare event. Jupiter catches up with Neptune every 13 years or so, but the last time it's done it in the sign where they're both at home was back in the mid-1800s. And I'll talk about that on the April forecast. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself. I only want to suggest that as Mercury these few days lines up with Jupiter and then lines up with Neptune, we're getting a sense of both the creative potential, the dream, the vision, the possibilities of that, because that Mercury is creating fantasies that then can become real. That's the upside. The downside is that those fantasies can also be based upon fear, and we can overreact if, in fact, we get caught up in fear rather than in love or acceptance or flowing energy. So that is on Wednesday, the 23rd. We move ahead to the 24th, and it's a relatively quiet day, except the moon is making a bunch of aspects. The moon is really the key. The moon is squaring Neptune and Mercury, so that's some difficulty in connecting our feelings to what the potential, what the possibilities are. Our words and our feelings are not necessarily matching up. And then as Thursday moves on, the moon makes 1, 2, 3, 4 hard aspects ending up with a square to the sun. That'll be the third quarter square to the sun, where it can be a crisis in consciousness. There's this sense it's almost like an eye of the needle that we have to get through in order to reach the next new moon, which will be the Aries new moon, and we'll get to that shortly also. But I don't see Thursday as being an easy day. I don't see it as being overwhelming. I see it being, it's lots of difficult moon transits, so it's noisy, it's moody, things are not working, things are annoying us, things are not falling into place as easily as we would like them. Now, on Friday, we have an interesting thing that occurs, because on Friday there is an exact septile between Jupiter and Pluto. Now, I don't normally talk a lot about septiles, transiting septiles and quintiles in these lectures. As many of you who follow my chart interpretation work know that I do when it comes to natal chart interpretation. I wouldn't even dream of doing a chart without including septiles. That's the 1/7, 2/7, 3/7, and the quintiles, the 1/5 and 2/5. And these aspects they don't fit into the zodiac, so they're not traditional aspects, they're modern aspects. But I think it's significant that Jupiter is forming several septiles this year with outer planets. Septiles are otherworldly, they're parallel universes. They're not always bad, but often things happen suddenly. The World Trade Tower bombing was an overwhelming septile moment. But great scientific breakthroughs also tend to have septile energy attached to them, those aha experiences. I don't want to turn this into a talk about septiles. I just want to note that slow-moving Jupiter forms an exact septile with Pluto on March 25th. Now remember, when Jupiter was lining up with Pluto, when it was conjunct Pluto 3 times in 2020, those were the peaks of the COVID numbers. Regardless of whether you think those numbers were real or exaggerated or understated, or doesn't matter. The actual numbers themselves peaked 3 times in 2020, along with the Jupiter-Pluto conjunction. So we have this Jupiter septile Pluto, and it'll be interesting to see if and what comes out with relationship to COVID, or to new discoveries, or to things that weren't disclosed that are now coming out in the public. We'll see how that unfolds. But I did make a note that Jupiter actually, very unusually, makes a septile with Pluto on March 25th. It makes a septile with Uranus on April 1st. And it makes a septile, and then Uranus makes a septile with Neptune in June. This is magical. This is, it's stuff that's outside the realm of cause and effect. And so it's just interesting to note, we've had a strong run on septile energy recently, and Jupiter adding to the mix. It'll be interesting to see what happens, and if something comes out even on Friday the 25th. The other thing that happens on the 25th, though, is that the moon makes a trine to Uranus midday, and then Mercury makes a half square to Uranus. This suggests, again, whether it's a war of words, or people saying things that are very clever, or learning something that we didn't know, there's this sense here of energy changing very rapidly, but it's intellectual, it's high frequency, and we may be very surprised as to what happens on Friday the 25th. Moving along on the 26th, we now have Mercury very early in the morning making a sextile to Pluto. Again, more stuff. This has to do with the stuff coming out in the open. I think that's been a continuing process with Mercury and Pluto. And remember, this is Mercury's first aspect with Pluto since its conjunction. Mercury actually conjoined Pluto, retrograded, conjoined it again, and then direct. And so here we might get a sense of where this energy is going. And late in the day, mid-afternoon, I guess, at 5:55 p.m., the moon moves from Capricorn after actually aligning with Pluto mid-afternoon, and it moves into Aquarius. Now, once the moon is in Aquarius, this is now Sunday the 27th, we have a couple of other things that are occurring. First of all, the moon moves into Aquarius, but Mercury moves into Aries. Now, Mercury is moving really rapidly now. And remember, watch that Mercury-Sun Chiron kind of come together because Mercury is moving faster than the Sun, and Mercury and the Sun together are moving faster than Chiron. And so we're going to see this in some way having to do with vulnerability, exposure, healing, something here that's going to be very important, I think, as these planets coalesce. So on Sunday the 27th, we also have the Sun making a half square with Saturn. The Sun making a half square with Saturn. This again is a reality check. There's some hardship here. There's having to deal with something. The fact that Mercury is moving into Aries, we'll figure it out. Let's go forward. We'll just work it out. We'll figure it out. However, that Mercury is also making a half square to Mars. And so Mercury here, interestingly enough, is making a let's see, what is it doing? Mercury is making a sextile to Pluto yesterday on the 26th, and then a half square to Mars today on the 27th, kind of indicating maybe that whatever information came out yesterday, today it becomes a little problematic. It's almost like yesterday someone tried to slough off the information, in some way just make it go away. But by the 27th, late in the afternoon, it is a Sunday, there may be, the boxing gloves may come out. It's like this person said, and they're an idiot. Well, yeah, well, you're more of it. I mean, this kind of war of words that can get out of hand. That's on the 27th. In fact, the moon, by late in the evening on the 27th, and I say late in the evening, at 9-10 o'clock Pacific time, but remember, that's already mid-morning in Eastern Europe. So the moon catches up with Mars. The moon catches up with Mars, and in fact, if you can see here in Aquarius, the moon over the next day is going to not only catch up with Mars as it does on Sunday night, but on Monday, that moon will also catch up with Venus and Saturn. And look, Venus and Saturn are now conjoined. This is very different than Venus lining up with Pluto as it was back around the new moon nearly a month ago. But again, this is our feelings are meeting walls. We're realizing that we're not going to get all of our needs met. We're not going to get what we want. We have to cool our heels. We're in it for the long haul rather than for anything immediate. But the moon on Monday, on Moon Day, starting early in the morning, will join up with Venus and Saturn, kind of confirming that Venus-Saturn conjunction. And I think that that's really important because it gives us the ability to personalize it, to feel the energy on a personal level. Then, on Tuesday, the 29th, it's a relatively quiet day. There is a septile that I normally wouldn't remark, but there's nothing else going on. The Sun forms a septile with Mars. Again, look for flare-ups of some sort that are unexpected. But also, what happens is that on Tuesday, the moon makes a sextile with Uranus later in the evening. And so again, there can be these breakthroughs. And again, this doesn't have to be global stuff. This just can be a part of a relationship or interaction with a friend or something, or just you decide to do nothing one evening and then something happens and all of a sudden you find yourself with a bunch of 4 or 5 friends or in a Zoom meeting with a bunch of friends or whatever it is. but there's something here that I think is a pleasant, unexpected thing Tuesday evening. On Wednesday, March 30th, a bit of a busier day. Venus is at the bending of the nodes. It's at the exact halfway point. When a planet is square the nodes, there's a bit of instability. There's a bit of sometimes it's more difficult for it to express. Sometimes it covers old ground and has to become more emphasized than it might because of something that it missed prior. In evolutionary astrology, in a natal interpretation, that would be called the skipped step, where something in the past is like coming back and you have to work it through because you didn't do it all the way. And so this is a Venus square the nodes, which can be uncomfortable. But we also have Mercury forming a half square with Saturn. Again, this is communication breakdown. This is not hearing what people are saying, or not listening, or not saying what you need to say. And yet the saving grace here is that the moon is coming through Pisces, and the moon is both conjoined Jupiter and Neptune. And look, Jupiter and Neptune are only 2 degrees apart now. So we're getting more of a flavor now as to what's going on as that moon comes through that Jupiter and Neptune. And that's a bit of dreaminess. And at the same time, the sun is forming a quintile with Pluto, and this can be very creative. This can be very spiritual. What does this mean? It means Wednesday is going to be a big day, one way or another, and it's basically hard to summarize it into a sentence. But I think that we will actually make some progress on Wednesday on a personal level if we choose to do the work. On Thursday, the ultimate day of the month, the last day of March, we have the moon moving into Aries at 2:30 a.m. and now we can see this kind of cluster of Aries energy, and we can see here that the sun is only a degree away from Chiron. Mercury is 3 degrees away from the sun, but the moon is coming through there and will make a new moon later tonight or early on the 1st of April, again, depending where you are on the planet. There's been a string of lunations that are very, very late in the day here in Seattle, or at night, which means that it depends where you are, what time zone you're in, as to whether it occurs for you late Thursday night. In Seattle, the new moon will be at 11:24 p.m. on March 31st, and I'm going to pop that up in just a minute. But I want to note something else here, and that is that going back maybe almost a week, that once the moon came around to this side of the chart, it's all the planets again are contained. Remember when I first opened, I talked about how the planets were all contained within less than a trine, and yet the moon was on the other side, kind of acting like a handle to a bucket. Well, now this bucket has no handle. Everything is really tight inside it. And in fact, it's even more interesting because all the planets are between the nodes. In other words, if you take and divide the chart in half by the nodal axis, the north node in Taurus, the south node in Scorpio, all of the planets, all of the known regular used planets, the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and Chiron are all on one side of the nodes. In Hindu astrology and Vedic astrology, they have conditions that they call yogas or doshas that are either really good or really bad, and heavy judgment on them often. And this is called Kalsarpa dosha. And it's not necessarily good. We've been in and out of this all late winter and early spring, and will continue to. And one might suggest that in Vedic astrology that this is about having one focus, one thing in life, and if it doesn't work out, then you're screwed because there's nothing else you do. And the solution or remedy to this, at least from what I've read, and I'm not a Vedic practitioner, but I do read some stuff, and so I'm not suggesting that this is the the only way to look at this. But I did read that there are some people who say that the remedy for a Kalsarpa dosha is actually to make sure you have more than one interest, so that if the first one doesn't work out, there's something else to go to. And in a way, I would look at a chart like this and say that it was a bit obsessive, because everything was so tight, and so there's no perspective here, because everything is like so close within a trine. It's like none of the planets really can get perspective enough to see any of the other planets. In fact, when the moon was in opposition back around the full moon, we had this ability to reflect, to see, and I said the moon had to work extra hard because it was reflecting everything. Well, now the moon also doesn't have any objectivity. There's just this, it's almost like, I think vampires, when they stand in front of a mirror, they're invisible. Well, in a way, we're all vampires, and I don't mean that we stay up late at night. Well, I do. And I don't mean that we drink blood and that we shrivel in the sunlight. But there's this sense that it's really difficult to get awareness of what's going on. It's difficult to see what's happening because there's no planets far enough away from the action. And on top of that, where are they clustering? They're clustering in Aries, the sign of I, me, mine, the sign of self-awareness, but no other awareness. It's the baby of the zodiac who's playing with fingers and toes, thinking what cool things these are, having no clue at all that they're attached to the self. It's like total self-absorption without even knowing it. So as we come, and as the moon moves closer and closer to the sun, meaning as we we're in the dark of the moon, but it's in the sign of Aries, that moon is going to make half squares with Mars, Saturn. It's going to conjunct Mercury and then make a half square with Venus. So there's a lot of stress and tension here about where our emotions can fit in, because they don't seem to fit in just right. And then at 11:24 p.m., we have the exact new moon at 11 degrees Aries, 30 minutes. But look how close all these planets are now in Aries, how close they are to Chiron. So we have this incredible opportunity to shift the game completely, to go, in the words of the Aries Captain James Kirk, to go where no man has gone before, where no human has gone before. This is potential for doing something different and doing something new. Whether we will live up to the potential of this, I don't know. But I do know that Venus is already past Saturn, and Mars is yet coming into Saturn. It has another couple of days. But the thing that's of significance here is that this new moon is, again, we're in something different, but Saturn is being contained by Venus and Mars. And so there's a bit of potential for creative breakthrough. But we'll see what happens, because that Jupiter is approaching Neptune. And again, even though it doesn't get there for another couple of weeks almost, the fact of the matter is that this is becoming one complicated stew or soup, and we're all in it together. Goo goo gajoob. All right, that's the month. I don't have a whole lot more to say about it, because this last couple of years, I think, has tested us all in ways that even if we thought we knew what was coming, we didn't. And whether this isn't even about astrology, this is just about being a human being and paying attention. And often we can tell, what's going on. The uncertainty level is high, and it's still high, and it's going to remain high for a little bit. But I think more than ever, and I get tired of saying this, you must get tired of hearing me say this, it's so important to make sure that we don't just end up out in the cosmos drifting around in these cosmic ideas thinking that that's so cool. We have to live in the real world. We have to bring things back down to home. We have to think, if we're going to think cosmically, we have to act locally. Otherwise, why bother? That's it. I will see you maybe at one of these upcoming conferences. And if not, I will see you for the April forecast. And for those of you who are patrons, I will see you for the Spring Equinox gathering. That's it. I'm Rick Levine, and till next time, be safe.